Title: The Passenger Manifest. Consider the luxury cruise ship mankind's most elegant confession. We seal ourselves inside floating palaces, surrendering to the ocean's indifference, convinced that enough champagne and choreographed sunsets can insulate us from the one truth we've spent our entire civilization avoiding. That civilization itself is performance. That the difference between a ballroom and a lifeboat is thinner than the hull separating us from the deep. Tonight, we sail with Elena Marsh, who paid $48,000 for 12 days of forgetting who she really was. She will get considerably more than she bargained for. They always do, in the Twilight Zone. The ship was called the Sovereign, and it deserved the name. 23 decks of white steel and tempered glass, a quarter-mile of corridors lit like surgical suites, restaurants that would have humbled Milan, and a passenger manifest of exactly 312 people who had each paid enough money to solve, in one of several African nations, a genuine water crisis. Elena Marsh stood at the stern rail on the second morning and watched the wake dissolve into flat, gray-green nothing. The sea behind them offered no evidence of where they'd come from. She found this appropriate. She had not told her daughter where she was going. She had not told her assistant. She had paid a man named Gerald, a man whose entire professional existence was devoted to making her untraceable, to ensure that for 12 days, Elena Marsh would be unreachable, unlocatable, and therefore, briefly, unreal. She sipped her coffee. A steward named Marco had brought it at 7:04, exactly when she'd requested, with the particular temperature she'd specified, and the small ceramic pitcher of oat milk that the ship's kitchen prepared fresh each morning, because Elena had mentioned once, at embarkation dinner, that she preferred it to the carton variety. She had tipped Marco with the casual generosity of someone for whom tipping at scale was simply a transaction in self-image. He had smiled with the particular warmth that service industry professionals cultivate over years, genuine gratitude alloyed with careful deference, and she had felt, briefly, like a good person. By the morning of day 3, Marco was gone. It was 9 a.m. before the ship's absence of personnel became undeniable. Elena had pressed the cabin service button at 8:15, waited, pressed it twice more. She'd walked to the restaurant on deck 7 and found it immaculate, fully set, steam rising from the buffet warmers, coffee circulating through the urn with mechanical patience, and not a single human being behind any counter in any kitchen doorway, visible at any station. At first she'd thought drill, fire procedure. Something official happening in a part of the ship she didn't have access to. She'd poured her own coffee, eaten a croissant, and watched the door. By the time Marcus Fell arrived, Marcus Fell of Fell Capital Partners, a man Elena recognized from the Forbes list and had briefly met at the embarkation cocktail hour, she understood from his expression that he'd reached the same tentative conclusion she was still refusing. "Have you found anyone?" he asked. "I've been to 3 restaurants and the main pool deck. I've been everywhere," he set his phone on the table. "No signal, obviously. The bridge is locked from inside. I've been knocking for 40 minutes. Elena looked at his phone, then at her own. The little icon in the corner that had been showing no signal since they'd cleared the port had not changed. She had expected it to change. She had been expecting it to change for 2 days, the way one expects weather to shift without anxiety, simply as a matter of patience. She looked at it differently now. "The ship is still moving," she said. "Yes, on a course, apparently by noon." The 312 passengers had organized themselves with a speed that Elena found both impressive and, in retrospect, entirely predictable. Marcus took charge of the initial assembly in the grand atrium, 7 stories of glass and steel, a space designed for galas, for the captain's dinner, for the kind of orchestrated magnificence that justified the ticket price. He stood on the 3rd-floor balcony and spoke with the confident projection of a man who had addressed shareholders. Elena stood below him and watched the upturned faces, the young couple from Austin, phones clutched like talismans, the retired admiral and his wife, composed with the eerie calm of people who've been trained for bad news, the family of 7 from Singapore, the children mercifully too young to understand, and the others, stratified already by some invisible magnetism into loose clusters that corresponded. Elena noted almost exactly with the ship's deck assignments, which corresponded almost exactly with what they'd paid. She had a suite on deck 22. The Austin couple were on deck 9. These were not, it turned out, neutral facts. Marcus reported what was known. Crew gone, bridge inaccessible, engines running, autopilot apparently engaged, distress systems in the communications room, powered but returning no response. No explanation visible in the ship's accessible computer terminals, which displayed only navigation data and continued cheerfully offering to book shore excursions. The food systems are fully operational, said a woman named Dr. Priya Osei, an epidemiologist from London, who had introduced herself to Elena on day one with the kind of brisk directness Elena respected. I've checked the main galley. The automated kitchen systems are running. We have food for what looks like several weeks. This should have been reassuring. Elena watched the faces in the atrium and saw it land differently in different people, and she filed that observation away. On day 4, a man broke into the ship's wine cellar. His name was Dennis Haverford, and Elena had noticed him at embarkation, mid-50s, alone, the particular tan of someone who worked outdoors rather than vacationed there, wearing new clothes with the slight stiffness of clothes bought recently for a purpose. She had wondered idly how he'd afforded Deck 12. She had not examined this thought or its implications. She had simply had it and moved on, the way one moves past a smell. Dennis Haverford broke into the wine cellar on day 4, and 6 passengers helped him, and they distributed bottles first to the people in their immediate orbit, and then, when challenged, announced that the wine was available to anyone who asked. But anyone who asked required knowing to ask. By day 5, Elena realized that information itself had become the first currency. Who knew where the secondary pantry was? Who had figured out that the spa's locked cabinet contained medical supplies? Who had discovered that the ship's library had a small cache of printed navigational charts, useless without instruments to read them against, but psychologically significant in a way that defied rational explanation? She had herself discovered something. She had not shared it. On day 3, moving through the officers' corridor on Deck 2 with Marcus and Dr. Osei, and the retired admiral whose name was Castleford, Raymond Castleford, she had slipped into an alcove while the others rounded a corner, and she had found, half hidden behind a fire equipment cabinet, a door she recognized as not a service door. It had no handle. It had, instead, a small keypad, and mounted beside it, at eye level, a camera. The camera had a green light. Elena had looked at the camera. The camera's lens had the particular stillness of something that does not blink. She had walked away and said nothing to Marcus or Dr. Osei or Admiral Castleford. She had turned this decision over in her mind and found various explanations for it that, all examined too closely, dissolved. The true reason was simpler. Information, she had learned over 52 years of accumulating it, was only useful while it was yours alone. She did not know what the room contained, but she knew where it was. And alone among the 312 passengers, she knew about the green light. By day 7, the ship had achieved something that no geopolitical conference, no peacekeeping mission, no carefully structured United Nations resolution had ever quite managed. It had sorted human beings into factions with a speed and clarity that made the whole history of ideology seem like elaborate decoration. It had not been violent. Not yet. It had been something that Elena found, if possible, more disturbing than violence. It had been orderly. The Deck 20 and above passengers, 47 people had, through a process of genteel consensus that never quite announced itself as exclusion, consolidated around the ship's upper observation lounge and claimed the adjacent kitchen as their provisioning point. They were not hostile to others. They simply preferred, they said, to manage their own affairs. Marcus Fell had proposed a working group structure, and someone had suggested that self-sufficiency at the unit level was more practical than trying to coordinate 300 people, and Elena had watched these sentences perform their function and had said nothing. She had, by this point, told Marcus about the door. She had not told him about the camera. It could be the captain, Marcus said, in the observation lounge on day 6, the two of them standing at the great curved windows while the sea rolled past in its absolute indifference. Or some kind of automated command center, a panic room. Yes, Elena said. We should open it. Yes, she said again. What she did not say, I have been watching the corridor to Deck 2 every day since I found it, and no one goes in. Whatever is behind that door is not trying to come out. It is waiting. On day 8, Dennis Haverford led 30 passengers to the observation lounge. Not storming, not shouting, walking in a group with the particular quiet of people who have rehearsed their calm. He was carrying a printed ship's diagram. Elena did not know where he'd found it, and he had marked on it, with a red pen, every provisioning point on the ship and circled the upper kitchen. He stood at the threshold of the lounge and spoke to Marcus Fell with the voice of someone who had spent years talking to people who didn't want to listen to him. "We're not asking for more than our share," Dennis said. "We're asking for an equal share." "Everyone has access to the Deck 7 restaurant," Marcus said. "The Deck 9 cafeteria is fully. The Deck 9 cafeteria has the automated food systems. This kitchen has the actual food. Real food. We've all noticed the difference." Elena watched Marcus's face perform a calculation she recognized. Not, is he right, but what is the cost of conceding? "We can certainly discuss. We're not here to discuss," Dennis said. And then, quietly, "We're not your crew. We stopped being crew when they left." Elena went to the door on Deck 2 that night, at 2 a.m., when the corridors were empty. She stood in front of the camera for a long time. Then she said aloud, feeling slightly ridiculous, "I know someone is watching." The green light did not change. "I want to know what this is," she said. "I want to know why." Silence. The soft vibration of the engines beneath her feet. The muffled shift of the sea. Then the keypad made a small sound, a single tone, like a tuning fork, and the door opened. The room was smaller than she'd expected and larger than it needed to be. It was a monitoring station, floor to ceiling on 3 walls, screens. Each screen showed a section of the ship. Every corridor, every lounge, every restaurant, the grand atrium, the observation deck, the Deck 9 cafeteria, where Dennis Haverford and a man named Benedict Soros, a Hungarian economist who had become, improbably, his lieutenant, were talking to a group of about 40 people in the low light. And at the center console, a single chair. In the chair, a man she recognized, the captain. His name, she had learned at embarkation dinner, was Captain Voss. He was tall, with the kind of weathered face that belongs to men who spend their careers at the intersection of beauty and danger. He had seemed, at embarkation dinner ceremonial, a prop in the experience. He was watching the screens with an expression that had no ceremony in it whatsoever. "Miss Marsh," he said without turning, "I expected you on day 4. She did not ask how he'd known her name. She looked at the screens. She looked at him. "You're watching us?" she said. "Yes." "Why did you take the crew off the ship?" He turned then, and she saw his face clearly. And what she saw was not cruelty and not satisfaction, and not the particular smugness of a man executing a plan. What she saw was exhaustion, deep and genuine exhaustion of the kind that comes from watching something you are afraid of and being right. "The crew is on a companion vessel 12 nautical miles northeast," he said. "Everyone is safe. The ship returns to port in 4 days. There will be a disembarkation that looks like a navigation delay and a mechanical issue, and everyone will receive a full refund and a substantial goodwill payment and a non-disclosure agreement that most of them will sign without reading, and all of them will honor because the payment is enough." Elena listened to this. She pulled a chair from beside the console and sat down uninvited, which told her something about herself that she stored away for later. "You're going to explain to me what this is," she said. "Yes." He looked at the screens again. "Have you heard of Dr. Marin Solis?" She hadn't. Behavioral economist. She wrote a paper in 2019 called Covenant Conditions, the question of what baseline social contracts survive when artificial scarcity and genuine uncertainty are introduced into a pre-existing stratified group. She'd run simulations, game theory model. She wanted empirical data. He paused. "She had a funding problem. I had investors who had a different kind of interest in the question." "What kind?" He was quiet for a moment. "The kind that doesn't publish papers." Elena looked at the screen showing the observation lounge. She could see the silhouette of Marcus Fell at the window, exactly where she had stood with him 2 days ago. "Governments," she said. It was not quite a question. Some, and entities that are interested in what governments are interested in before governments know they're interested in it. And what's the question? "What are they trying to learn?" Captain Voss looked at her steadily. "How long it takes," he said. "How long it takes for people who've been stripped of institutional authority to reconstitute hierarchy. What form the hierarchy takes, whether resource scarcity or information scarcity, is the more powerful organizing principle. Whether class position at the start correlates with class position at the end, or whether new hierarchies emerge, he gestured at the screens. Whether Dennis Haverford ends up running this ship, or whether Marcus Fell does. And what, if anything, they each have to do to get there. Elena sat with this. Outside, the sea moved in its ancient way, utterly uninterested. "I'm one of the subjects," she said. "Yes. And you let me in here?" "Yes. Why?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she had the disorienting sensation of being read, not flattered, not managed, but actually read, the way she could sometimes read a balance sheet and see, under the numbers, the human decisions that had produced them. "Because you found the door on day 3 and didn't tell anyone," he said. "Because you told Marcus Fell on day 6 and still didn't tell him about the camera. Because you came alone at 2 a.m. and you spoke to the camera instead of trying to break the door down or going to get help." He paused. "Because you are the data point I didn't expect." "I'm a data point who knows about the experiment," she said. "That usually invalidates the data." "Yes," he said. "That's why I let you in." She sat in that room for 2 hours. She watched the screens. She watched Dennis Haverford's group, which had grown to 60 people, and had, while she sat there, reached an agreement with Marcus Fell's group that she could not hear but whose terms she understood from the body language. Something had been traded. Something had been conceded. The thing about the observation deck factions that she had understood on day 5, that they were mirrors, that they had reached the same calculus from opposite starting positions, proved itself in real time on the screen in front of her. She watched Dr. Osei, who had not joined either faction, moving through the Deck 7 restaurant with a clipboard she'd found somewhere, quietly cataloging the automated food systems with the methodical patience of someone solving the actual problem. She watched Admiral Castleford, who had also not joined either faction, sitting in the ship's small chapel on Deck 4 with a group of 12 people that cut across every demographic line on the manifest, talking. Just talking. She couldn't hear them. She watched their faces. She could not tell what they were saying, but the faces did not have the calculating quality that Marcus's group had, or the righteous vigilance of Dennis's group. They looked like people trying to think together. She thought about what the data was showing. She thought about what it meant that she was watching it. She thought about who was going to receive this data and what they were going to do with it. Then she thought about something else. "The non-disclosure agreement," she said to Voss. "Everyone signs it. The compliance rate on previous voyages has been 97%. Previous voyages." She let this sit in her chest. How many? This is the 4th. She thought about that. 4 ships, 4 passenger manifests. 312 people times 4, minus the ones who didn't sign, who'd presumably to people who hadn't believed them, or had believed them and found nowhere to direct the belief. "What do they learn?" she asked. "The clients. What do they do with it? What do people always do with a detailed map of how humans organize themselves under pressure?" She looked at him. He did not look away. "They redraw the territories," she said, "among other things." Elena turned back to the screens. She watched Marcus Fell and Dennis Haverford standing together now, a strange alliance of convenience, both of them looking at something off-screen that she could not see. She watched Dr. Osei annotate her clipboard. She watched Admiral Castleford's small group in the chapel, their faces in conversation. She had $48,000 worth of suite and a green light that had opened a door. She had information that no one else had. She was, the captain had told her, the data point he hadn't expected. She understood, sitting there, that this was the most important thing anyone had said to her in years, and that she had 2 choices, and that one of them was safer, and that she had spent 52 years choosing the safer one, and that the safer one had produced the particular life she'd paid $48,000 to briefly escape. She went to Dr. Osei first, not because Dr. Osei was the most powerful person on the ship. She wasn't, not by the old metrics, but because she was working the actual problem, and because Elena had watched her for 8 days and had not once seen her use information as a private currency. She found her in the Deck 7 restaurant at 4 a.m., still with the clipboard. "There's a monitoring room on Deck 2, Elena said. "The captain is in it. The crew is safe. We return to port in 4 days. We are part of an ongoing research program that studies how people organize themselves when institutional authority is removed. The data is sold to clients I don't know the full list of." She paused. I've been sitting with this for 2 hours and I can't figure out what to do with it by myself. Dr. Osei set down the clipboard. She looked at Elena with the expression of a scientist who has just received an unexpected result and is deciding what it means. Does the captain know you're telling me this? He didn't tell me not to. That's not the same thing. No, Elena said. It isn't. Dr. Osei was quiet for a long moment. If we tell everyone we alter the experiment, the data becomes contaminated. Yes, the clients don't get what they paid for. Yes, which means the captain doesn't get paid. Yes, which means the research continues to the next voyage with a new set of people who don't know. Elena had not thought through this chain as cleanly as Dr. Osei had produced it in 60 seconds. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, which was the particular vertigo of sitting across from someone smarter than she was. Yes, she said, and if we don't tell anyone, Dr. Osei continued, we give consent, retroactively and without any formal process, to being research subjects without disclosure, and we allow the same to happen to the next group. And the clients, whoever they are, get their data and use it for whatever they're using it for. Yes, Elena said for the 4th time. And you came to me at 4 a.m. because? Elena thought about this. Because I watched you for 8 days and you never once treated what you knew as something to hold over anyone. Dr. Osei picked up the clipboard. She set it down again. She did something with her face that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. We tell everyone, she said, but we tell them together. All of us in the atrium, Marcus and Dennis and Castleford and everyone. She paused. We do it in daylight, on record. So whoever is watching those screens watches us choose. They did it at 9 a.m. Elena stood in the grand atrium on the 3rd-floor balcony where Marcus Fell had stood on day 1. She had not slept. She could feel that in her body, a clean, specific kind of exhaustion that was different from tiredness. That was the body's record of a decision. She told them everything she knew. She did not editorialize. She did not apologize. She told them about the door, the camera, the captain, the screens, the previous voyages. She told them about the clients and what the captain had said and had not said. She told them there were 4 days left. The atrium was completely silent in a way that a space filled with 312 people is almost never silent. Then Marcus Fell said, from below, You sat on this for 2 hours. Yes, she said. Why? She looked at him. The same reason you sat on the wine stores being in a different condition than the cafeteria food. The same reason Dennis Haverford waited 4 days before he came upstairs. We all have information we hold until we figure out what it's worth. This landed in the atrium and did not make anyone happy, including her. She had not meant it as an accusation. She had meant it as a mirror. She watched the faces below her and saw it work as both. Admiral Castleford, she found his face, composed and unreadable, raised his hand in the slightly old-fashioned way of a man from a culture of formal meetings. What do we do, he asked, with 4 days? Elena looked at him. She looked at Dr. Osei, who was standing beside her on the balcony. Whatever we decide to do, Dr. Osei said, that's the point. We decide. In the monitoring room on deck 2, Captain Voss watched the screens. He watched Elena Marsh stand on the 3rd-floor balcony and tell 312 people exactly what he'd told her. He watched their faces. He watched Marcus Fell and Dennis Haverford stand 6 feet apart and have the same expression at the same time. He watched Admiral Castleford raise his hand. He had a phone in his breast pocket. Not a ship's phone, a personal satellite unit, the kind that worked everywhere. He had a number in it. His clients, he had not called them. He understood, watching the screens, that this was why he had opened the door. Not because Elena Marsh was an interesting data point. Because he had run 3 of these voyages and had watched, each time, the same things happen with the specificity of a machine. The hierarchy reforming, the information hoarding, the alliance building, the small brutalities of exclusion performed with such courtesy that they barely registered as brutalities. And he had told himself that this was scientific, that this was useful, that this was what the work required. And then Elena Marsh had stood in front of the camera at 2 a.m. and said, I know someone is watching, and something in him that had been very quiet for 3 voyages had answered. He watched the atrium. He watched 312 people absorb the information that they were being watched. And then, and this was the thing he had not seen before, the data point that no one had paid for began to act better, not perfectly, not without conflict. Marcus Fell was already arguing with someone. Dennis Haverford's face was complicated with the kind of anger that would need time, but they were doing it in the open now, in the light, in front of each other, without the insulation of not knowing. Voss picked up the satellite phone. He did not call his clients. He called the companion vessel. "Bring the crew back," he said. "We're done early." The crew arrived by tender at 11 a.m. Marco appeared at Elena's elbow in the Deck 7 restaurant with a coffee at exactly the right temperature, with the ceramic pitcher of oat milk. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about tipping. She thought about what a tip meant, what it performed, what it replaced. "Marco," she said, "will you sit down?" He looked uncertain, the particular uncertainty of someone whose entire professional training said this was not how it worked. "Please," she said. He sat. She had no idea what she was going to say. She was aware of this. She sat with the uncertainty, which felt like something she hadn't felt in a very long time, and might be the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet. Outside, through the salt-hazed glass, the ocean continued its ancient indifference. But the ship was turning. She could feel it in the slight shift of the deck under her feet. The change in the engine's frequency, a key change, almost musical. They were going back. Elena Marsh will sign the non-disclosure agreement. So will 291 of her fellow passengers. The remaining 20 will speak and be disbelieved or believed and ignored, which amounts to the same thing. Captain Voss will never run a fifth voyage. The research will continue under different management on different ships, with a better camera angle in the alcove on Deck 2. And yet, in the space between one thing and the next, between the holding and the telling, between the watching and the choosing, something happened aboard the Sovereign that no contract can quite contain and no screen fully captures. 312 people discovered, briefly, that they were being observed, and for approximately 4 hours, in the full light of that knowledge, tried to be worth watching. Whether that's tragedy or miracle is a question. The Twilight Zone respectfully declines to answer. Some doors we have to open ourselves,